So I'll just briefly mention one of the results about aggregation of preferences across multiple humans. And this has been a fairly settled area of economics for a long time. Actually, John Hassani, who is a Berkeley professor, won the Nobel Prize in part for this work. So the social aggregation theorem is that if you're making a decision on behalf of n people, then the only undominated, or what's called Pareto optimal strategies, are to optimize a linear combination of the preferences of the individuals, right? And if you in addition assume that no individual should be privileged, then that linear combination just becomes a sum, right? That everyone gets equal weight in that linear combination. But that requires an assumption that's quite unrealistic, which is that everybody has the same belief about the future. So this is called the common prior assumption. If you get rid of that assumption and allow people to have different beliefs about the future, the theorem gives you a different result. So this is something that Andrew Critch, who's a member of our group, proved a few years ago, that the optimal policies, when you have different beliefs, actually have dynamic weights for the preferences of the individual. And those weights change over time as the predictions turn out to be true or false that each individual is making about the future. So whoever has the best prior that turns out to give high probability to the future that actually unfolds will end up getting an exponentially larger weight than the person who has the worst prior. Okay, so a very inegalitarian idea. But this is a theorem, right? And everybody prefers this policy because everybody believes that their beliefs are the right beliefs, right? Nobody believes that their beliefs are wrong, right? Because they wouldn't be beliefs. So this is inevitable. What we do about it is a different question. So I'll just wrap up and say a little bit about large language models, because that's probably what you were expecting me to talk about. So what are they, right? They're circuits trained to imitate human linguistic behavior. So you want to think of their outputs not as words, but as actions, right? They are choosing to emit a linguistic act with each word. So that's a way to think about it. As Ken experienced, they do it incredibly well. It's really hard to see coherent grammatical text and not think that there's a mind behind it. So if you need an antidote, think about a piece of paper that has written on it some beautiful piece of prose or poetry, and ask yourself, is this piece of paper intelligent because it has this beautiful paragraph of text on it, right? We don't know where the large language models are between a piece of paper and AGI, right? They're somewhere along there. We just don't know where they are. Now, human linguistic behavior is generated by humans who have goals. So from a simple Occam's razor point of view, right, if you're going to imitate human linguistic behavior, then the default hypothesis is that you're going to become a goal-seeking entity in order to generate linguistic behavior in the same way that humans do, right? So there's an open question, are these large language models developing internal goal structures of their own? And I asked Microsoft that question a couple of weeks ago when they were here to speak, and the answer is we have no idea, right? And we have no way to find out. We don't know if they have goals, we don't know what they are, right? So let's think about that a bit more, right? One might initially think, well, you know, what they're doing, if they're learning to imitate humans, then maybe actually, you know, almost coincidentally, that will end up with them being aligned with what humans want. All right, so perhaps we accidentally are solving the alignment problem here by the way we're training these systems. And the answer to that is it depends. It depends on the type of goal that gets learned. And I'll distinguish two types of goals. There's what we call common goals, where things like painting the wall or mitigating climate change, where if you do it, I'm happy. If I do it, you're happy. We're all happy, right? These are goals where any agent doing these things would make all the agents happy. And then there are indexical goals, which are meaning indexical to the individual who has the goal. So drinking coffee, right? I'm not happy if the robot drinks the coffee, right? What I want to have happen is if I'm drinking coffee and the robot does some inverse reinforcement learning, hey, Stuart likes coffee, I'll make Stuart a cup of coffee in the morning. The robot drinking the coffee is not the same, right? So this is what we mean by an indexical goal. And becoming ruler of the universe, right, is not the same if it's me versus the robot, okay? And obviously, if systems are learning indexical goals, that's arbitrarily bad as they get more and more capable. Okay, and unfortunately, humans have a lot of indexical goals. We do not want AI systems to learn from humans in this way. Imitation learning is not alignment. And then the question is, not just do they have goals, but can they pursue them? Right? How do those goals causally affect the linguistic behavior that they produce? Well, again, since we don't even know if they have goals, we certainly don't know if they can pursue them. But the empirical, anecdotal evidence suggests that, yeah, I mean, if you look at the Kevin Bruce conversation, Sydney, the Bing version of GPT-4, is pursuing a goal for 20 pages, despite Kevin's efforts to redirect and talk about anything but getting married to Sydney, right? So if you haven't seen that conversation, go and read it and ask yourself, is Sydney pursuing a goal here, right? As opposed to just generating the next word. Okay, the last thing I want to make before I wrap up, I'm sorry I'm a little over time, is that black boxes, as I've just illustrated, are really tough to understand. Right? This is a trillion parameter or more system. It's been optimized by about 1 billion trillion random perturbations of the parameters. And we have no idea what it's doing. We have no idea how it works. And that causes a problem. Right? Even if you wrap it in this outer framework, the assistance game framework, right? It's going to be very hard for us to prove a theorem saying that yep, this is definitely going to be beneficial when we start running it. So part of my work now is actually to develop AI systems more along the lines that I described before, the knowledge-based approach, where we have, where each component of the system, each piece of knowledge has its own meaningful semantics that we can individually check against our own understanding or against reality. That those pieces are put together in ways where we understand the logic of the composition, and then we can start to have a rigorous theory of how these systems are going to behave. I just don't know of any other way to achieve enough confidence in the behavior of the system that we would be comfortable moving forward with the technology. And parabolic programming languages are one possible substrate, not the only one, but one substrate that seems to have these types of properties and to exhibit the kinds of capabilities that we would like. For example, being able to do computer vision better than deep networks, right? Being able to understand language and learn extremely fast from very small numbers of examples. So to summarize, I think AI has vast potential and that creates unstoppable momentum. But if we pursue this in the standard model, then we will eventually lose control over the machines. But we can take a different route, and talking of losing control over the machines, we can take a different route that actually leads to AI systems that are beneficial to humans. And I'm afraid to be really boring, right? It's a very exciting time in AI, but I think AI is going to end up looking more like aviation and nuclear power, where there's a lot of regulation, where the developers, the engineers are extremely careful about how they build their systems. They check, they verify, and they drive down the error rate as much as they possibly can. We don't look anything like that right now. But if we're going to be mature about this, if we believe that we have sparks of AGI, right, that's a technology that could completely change the face of the Earth and civilization. Right? How can we not take that seriously? The open letter asks for a moratorium on training and releasing systems more powerful than GPT-4 for 6 months. I did not write the letter at all. When they asked me to sign it, I suggested all kinds of changes, but it was too late at that point to change it. But I decided to sign it because I think the underlying principle is very simple. You should not deploy systems whose internal principles of operation you don't understand, that may or may not have their own internal goals that they are pursuing, right, and that show sparks of AGI, right? It's incredibly irresponsible to do that. And you know, the OECD, which is a very boring organization, right? Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. You know, it's all of the wealthy countries talking about, you know, making sure that their economies interoperate successfully. So they have AI principles that all the major governments have signed up to, right? This is a legal document that says that AI systems need to be robust, predictable, and you need to be able to show that they don't present an undue risk before you can deploy them, right? So I view this petition as simply asking that the companies abide by the AI principles that the OECD governments have already agreed to. And we're sort of nudging the governments to go from principles to regulation. So that's the idea. Okay, second question, what about jobs? Well, that's a whole other lecture. In fact, one of the 4 Reith lectures is exactly about that. And it's a long story. My view, in a nutshell, is that the impact on jobs is going to be enormous. And obviously, general purpose AI would be able to do any job that humans can do, with a couple of exceptions, right? So jobs that we don't want robots to do, and jobs where humans have a comparative advantage because we think, the same subjective experience as each other, which machines do not, right? A machine can never know what it's like to hit your thumb with a hammer or what it's like to fall out of love with somebody. That's simply not available to them, and so we have that empathic advantage. And to me, that suggests that the future economic roles for human beings will be in interpersonal roles, and that's the future of the economy, not a whole bunch of data scientists, right? The world does not need 4 billion data scientists, or I'm not even sure we need 4 million data scientists. So it's a very different future, but not a terrible one, but one we are totally unprepared for, because we don't have, the human sciences have been neglected. We don't have the science base to make those professions productive and really valuable in helping each other. But there's an entire category of preferences that you might think of as relative preferences. Some people in economics call these positional goods, right? So I like having this nice shiny car parked out in front of my house, not just because it's a nice shiny car and I like driving it, because it's nicer and shinier than the guy down the street, right? I like having a Nobel Prize, not because it's a big shiny piece of gold and I get €1 million, but because nobody else has one. If everyone else in the world got a Nobel Prize at the same time I did, I would feel a lot less good about myself, right? Isn't that weird? But relative preferences play a huge part in people's identities, right? Think about soccer fans and how they care about their soccer team being better than the other people's soccer teams, and so on. So if we were to zero out all those relative preferences, which operate mathematically exactly like sadism, right, it would be a massive change. So I don't have a clear recommendation on that point. but it's certainly something we should work on.